The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What a news day. Republican Indiana Governor Mike Pence basically had no choice but to get on TV yesterday because of the controversy around that so-called religious freedom bill that he signed, which allows discrimination against people based on their sexual orientation. Businesses and municipalities started announcing that they were going to reduce their business in Indiana. Terrible press, just really bad. So Republican Governor Mike Pence comes out and he pretends that the law isn't anti-gay and that he isn't anti-gay, both of which are just pathetic lies. And we have all the information for you. We're going to break it down piece by piece, as I like to say. Here's the first claim Mike Pence made, which is there's nothing in this legislation that is anti-gay or gives people the right to discriminate.
What I want to make sure is that it is clear to Hoosiers, which are the people that I serve, and frankly, clear to anyone that would come to visit our state, that there is in this legislation no license to discriminate, no right to deny services, and I think we can develop that language. This law does not give anyone a license to discriminate. This law that I signed last week does not give anyone the right to deny services.
Even other Indiana legislators acknowledge that this law allows anti-gay discrimination. Senate President Pro Temp David Long and House Speaker Brian Bosma were asked by a reporter point blank about the fact that when you pass this law and the state doesn't have LGBT people as a protected class, that this does open it up to discrimination. And the quote was from the reporter, "You guys have said repeatedly that we shouldn't be able to discriminate against anyone, but if you just ignore the existence of this law, can't we already do that now? Can't so-and-so in Richmond put up a sign and say no gays allowed?" Bosma was forced to answer, and he said, well, it would depend. If you were in a community that had a human rights ordinance, that wouldn't be the case. And the reporter logically said, but most of the state doesn't have that, correct? And Bosma reluctantly answered, that's correct. And then an Indiana business publicly announces they will deny service to gay people. The O'Connor family seem like great folks. They own Memories Pizza in Walkerton, Indiana. They say they will not serve gay people. Quote, if a gay couple came in and wanted us to provide pizzas for their wedding, we would have to say no. That's Crystal O'Connor of Memories Pizza. It's hard to imagine anyone, never mind gay people, wanting pizza at their wedding, but let's suspend disbelief around that for a second, Lewis. What will Mike Pence do? Very clearly, this business is discriminating.
Unless he has a different definition of discrimination. It kind of reminds me of some Bill Clinton interviews. But yeah, I'm not, you know, this is a PR campaign now. He's doing damage control. So he has to come out and lie and say this nonsense. And
then the lies continue, just pathetic lies. The part about how Mike Pence isn't anti-gay, blah, 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 looking like he was going to cry. Here's Mike Pence.
Personal reflection for a moment, if I can. I abhor discrimination. The way I was raised was like most Hoosiers, with the golden rule, that you should do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I believe in my heart of hearts that no one should be harassed or mistreated because of who they are, who they love, or what they believe. And I believe every Hoosier shares that conviction.
Yeah, this is false. Okay, let's go through the list. When Mike Pence signed the bill in question, he was flanked by some of the most anti-gay people in Indiana. Kurt Smith, president of the Indiana Family Institute, who believes homosexuality is harmful to all and that gayness is like having sex with animals, was standing behind Mike Pence clapping as he signed the bill. Eric Miller, the executive director of Advance America, known for spreading the lie that pastors will go to jail if they say mean things about gays, was there. Mike Pence is on video sucking up to this guy. And then Micah Clark, who believes homosexuality is a treatable mental disorder and once shamed a lesbian high school student who wore a tuxedo to prom, was standing there. How much of it weight should we put in the fact that virulent anti-gay bigots were cheering on Mike Pence as he signed this bill into law?
Yeah, it's very, very obvious. I think if Mike Pence actually abhorred discrimination like he says he does, the bills that would be being passed would be pretty much the opposite of this.
But you might say, hold on a second though, guys, that's guilt by association. What has Mike Pence himself said? Well, let's open up that door. He has said several times that giving gays and lesbians protected status is not part of his agenda. His 2000 campaign website called for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, not because Mike Pence thought Don't Ask, Don't Tell was hateful and discriminatory, but because he thought gays should be banned from the military, period, not just that they should be allowed as long as they don't reveal their homosexuality. And he also said he doesn't want to fund some AIDS programs unless the funding comes with the acceptance of forcing people to pray away the gay. And then in 2010, Mike Pence signed an open letter by the anti-gay hate group Family Research Council, which of course opposed gay marriage and wanted to protect what they call natural marriage. Mike Pence wants you to believe he's not anti-gay. He signs the bill, flanked by some of the biggest anti-gay bigots in Indiana, and he has signed letters by anti-gay hate groups. He is anti-gay, and he is lying to everybody.
Seems to be extremely anti-gay. And I like the way this conversation, the language of this whole thing has progressed, because how many times did you even hear him say religious freedom during that whole little speech or press conference?
Well, that's an interesting thing. So I got a few emails from people saying, listen, David, it's obvious that Mike Pence is anti-gay. It's obvious that this is terrible PR, blah, blah, blah. The law is terrible. But the fact that Mike Pence even felt the need to go on live television and try to smooth things over tells us that we're in a situation now where this type of thing is not nearly as acceptable as it once was. Is the fact that Mike Pence is lying and doing the damage control actually a sign of progress?
A huge sign of progress. I think that everything has worked. Social media, the outrage, we have applied enough pressure to actually make this happen. That's a good thing.
Not only is Indiana dealing with terrible PR and losing business and jobs and funding around this anti-gay so-called religious freedom bill, but they're also having an HIV outbreak, of course, caused by the closing down of a few Planned Parenthood clinics. Back in 2013, the Planned Parenthood clinic in Scott County, Indiana, was forced to close. They used to do HIV testing. They did not offer abortion services. The Scott County clinic and 4 other Planned Parenthoods in the state all provided HIV testing and information. They've all closed since 2011, in large part because of funding cuts to the state's public health infrastructure. The controversy was coinciding with the funding cuts around Planned Parenthood. We know, most reasonable people know, that abortion services are a very small part of what Planned Parenthood does. Many individual clinics don't even offer any abortion services, but still, there was this big controversy, a big revival against Planned Parenthood. So what happened? Now, Scott County, Indiana, sickening, is at the center of an exploding HIV outbreak. You can't go and get tested. You never know you have HIV. You pass it to someone else who also doesn't get tested because these clinics have been shut down. And it's very easy to see, Lewis, how this leads to an HIV outbreak. All 5 clinics that were forced to close offered HIV testing for free. None offered abortions. Big controversy, apparently. And now an HIV outbreak in Indiana.
The right has had a very successful misinformation campaign when it comes to Planned Parenthood and similar clinics, because now when you say Planned Parenthood, unfortunately, it's the only association is abortion.
And Republican Governor Mike Pence, his office was asked for comment about this HIV outbreak. They refused that request for comment. I guess they were too busy passing anti-gay religious freedom laws with bigots standing behind the governor as he signed the bills into law.
That is freedom, and nothing says freedom like being able to transmit HIV to whomever, wherever, whenever.
And what the Indiana situation is showing us with their anti-gay so-called Religious Freedom Act is that the next front in the fight against gay equality is arguments of religious freedom, and Arkansas has now passed HB 1228, which Governor Asa Hutchinson, I don't have to tell you what party he's a member of, plans to sign. It would make Arkansas the second state to pass one of these religious protections in 2015, in addition to Indiana. Isn't it so obvious what's going on, Louis, that states initially wanted to just ban gay marriage as a thing? It's increasingly clear now that we have around 30 states that have legalized same-sex marriage, and whether it's in June or whether it's within a few years, the Supreme Court will likely issue some kind of a broad ruling saying states can't ban gay marriage. The new front is, let's say that under religious freedom, we are allowed to refuse service to gay couples. This is kind of a retreat in a way, but it's a response to losing on the gay marriage issue.
It is. It's the next step in the battle. And yeah, how far will this go before the Supreme Court or individual states have to say, well, now we need to protect LGBT people. You know, that needs to be a protected class. I think, does that follow?
I think that it is completely obvious that we should be protecting sexual orientation and gender identity under non-discrimination laws. However, we have to remember that if those laws come from the federal level, the states' rights, when it's convenient to push states' rights crowd, will say, well, our state religious freedom bill supersedes federal non-discrimination law. And of course, the states' rights argument is only made when it's convenient for these individuals. And the bottom line is it could come down to the economy. These laws are not going to be good for the economy. Numerous businesses saying that Arkansas should not pass this law in the same way that many businesses said and now are holding true to pulling business and jobs out of Indiana after Indiana passed that law. At best, these laws will have no impact on the economy, but increasingly it seems like they have the real potential to have a negative impact on state economies.
It really could. Even Walmart said that that this, you know, that the Indiana bill should not be law. And yeah, who knows what the Republicans will say about the free market after stuff like that happens.
Follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by the audience through the David Pakman Show membership program, which you can sign up for at davidpakman.com/membership. Today's new member of the day is Gail Hall. Gail, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Gail gets access to all the great member benefits, including the members-only bonus show, a whole other show just for our members. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up. I have a really great episode of Hatriot Mail for you today. But first, you should know what Hatriot Mail is.
If Ayn Rand and Ronald Reagan had a baby and suckled that child off the teat of liberty, its cries would sound a little something like Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
So a little while ago, we interviewed Pastor James David Manning. He's the guy, a pastor up in Harlem, who believes that Starbucks puts gay semen in their coffee to flavor it up. How he knows that it would make it taste better, I have no idea. I didn't think that he had any supporters, but he does. And one of them, actually many of them, wrote into us after we interviewed him. Here is what one of them had to say.
Pastor Manning is a godly man. He is spot on with truth about all things. Makes no difference to me what you people do, but as Pastor Manning and Phil Robertson says, the Bible is clear. It's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve.
Ugh.
It's clear it's an abomination to God for man to lay with man, or woman to lay with woman. Don't matter to me what y'all do, lick or stick. You will be in front of God, same as I, and answer for your deeds on earth. It's not my law. It's not Pastor Manning's law. It's not Phil Robertson's law. It's the written words and law of God. Stop trying to change the word of God. It's His law. If you don't like it, hey, Jack, it's all on you. God's word is clear. You're a queer.
The funniest part about this, aside from there, if you looked at the transcript of this Hatriot Mail, there's not an apostrophe to be found in this whole thing. Louis, you're not going to find an apostrophe hiding anywhere in this thing. But I think the most common grammatical error in Hatriot Mail is using your, Y-O-U-R, instead of the contraction for you-are, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E. I think that that's the most common hatriotic error we see.
By far. I see that one everywhere, really, not just among Hatriots. But I really love this one. And what would you expect from a fan of Pastor Manning?
I told you yesterday on the bonus show that Comedy Central confirmed that comedian Trevor Noah is going to be replacing Jon Stewart as the host of The Daily Show at some point between July and the end of this year. I said I don't think it will go very well, but not because of Trevor Noah specifically. I know you weren't here yesterday, Louis, but what I said was I think that at this point, the place of The Daily Show within the broader media critique landscape is very different than when The Daily Show started, and that Jon Stewart carried a lot of that audience. But now that it's a new host, I just don't know that The Daily Show represents today what it did when it started. And I think Jon Stewart leaving is going to also see a lot of the fans leave. That's why I didn't think hiring Trevor Noah was going to go too well. But now there's a series of anti-Semitic tweets from Trevor Noah that are becoming the subject of some pretty significant controversy. I'll read some of them to you and we'll analyze each one of them. First one, quote, South Africans know how to recycle like Israel knows how to be peaceful. Okay, this one's anti-Israeli on policy. Not really a huge deal. I don't think this is anti-Semitic. Next tweet. Almost bumped a Jewish kid crossing the road. He didn't look before crossing, but I still would have felt so bad in my German car. Okay, so joking about Germans killing Jews in the Holocaust. He's a comedian. It's edgy, I guess. It's not necessarily anti-Semitic. He's not furthering any particular stereotypes about Jews or anything like that. Next tweet. Behind every rap billionaire is a double as rich Jewish man. Now we're starting to get into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories centered around Jewish control of media and the entertainment industry. But to be honest, I'm more offended by this because of how lowbrow humor it is and how it's just not funny and how it really pales in comparison to the caliber of Jon Stewart's comedy. And he also made a bunch of jokes about fat chicks and women who were overweight and not attractive, according to him. My view is if you have to resort to Jewish jokes and making fun of fat chicks, it's pretty lame comedy.
Yeah, I think so. It doesn't. When I heard that he was doing this, first of all, I had to look him up because I really had no idea who he was. And I don't know. It just seems like such a contrast between him and Jon Stewart. It doesn't really make sense to me.
No, it seems like a completely different level. And yesterday afternoon, Comedy Central put out I guess some sort of a statement about this. And they said, like many comedians, Trevor Noah pushes boundaries. He's provocative and spares no one, himself included. That's the thing. It's not so much a question of not sparing people, but doing the same old tired Jewish control of media conspiracy theories. It's not really edgy. It's just lame and tired, you know? And then they went on to say to judge him or his comedy based on a handful of jokes is unfair. He's a talented comedian with a bright future at Comedy Central. And then Trevor Noah's response was, quote, to reduce my views to a handful of jokes that didn't land is not a true reflection of my character, nor my evolution as a comedian. For me, this is not at all about, hey, you can't make jokes about certain things and that type of thing. It's more about increasingly thinking that Trevor Noah's comedy isn't that good.
I don't think it's that good from what I've seen. And is he someone who is as passionate about politics and what's happening in the country and world as Jon Stewart?
Well, a lot of his comedy is kind of anti-racist and anti-South African apartheid. So there's definitely passion there. You know, whether he's at the caliber of what Jon Stewart has been for a long time now, I guess it remains to be seen. Will you be watching when he takes over?
Well, I haven't been watching with Jon Stewart, so no, I probably won't be.
Yeah, I probably won't either. That's kind of the reality. But the curiosity factor will probably have me at least tuning in to see what it's like. Let's talk about Louie Gohmert. Republican Texas Congressman Louie Gohmert lost it at a congressional hearing with FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler on the topic of net neutrality. This is so funny. This is the same Louie Gohmert who was once a judge in Texas, the same Louie Gohmert who said Greek gay massages prove that the military shouldn't allow gays, who said that nurses infected with Ebola are part of a Democrat plan, who wished that Central American kids were more like North Koreans, and who said that President Obama will not defend women from illegal alien rape. Some ISPs, as we've told you, are now suing the FCC over the new net neutrality regulations. Louie Gohmert seems to agree with them. Tom Wheeler went and said at this hearing that the FCC is absolutely within its boundaries to make the new rules. But Louie Gohmert didn't agree, saying that they are playing God with the internet. Take a look at this.
And I heard you just say Congress asked us to look at the rules. What from Congress asked the FCC to look at rules regarding the internet?
The 1996 Telecommunications Act.
Oh, so it was recent. That was 19 years ago. You seized on that to say Congress was asking you to look at the internet 19 years later. Well, I would submit to you that something in 1996 had nothing to do with wanting you to take charge of the internet. And I would also thank you for your willingness to leave some room for exploratory business models and new business models. That's really so gracious of you, because before the FCC stepped in, everybody was able to explore new business models. The only difference is now you're playing God with the internet, saying, I will decide, we'll leave some room for you to come up with new business models. That's not your job.
The FCC is playing God with the internet, which was invented by humans, Louis.
It was invented by humans, Al Gore. But yes, please continue.
The funniest part of this to me is that Louie Gohmert argues, listen, the Telecommunications Act was written 19 years ago in 1996, so it may not be exactly relevant to modern society. That's the logic we're trying to apply to the Constitution. It was written hundreds of years ago, and we have constitutional fetishists who insist on their version of a literal interpretation of the Constitution. How come the 1996 Telecommunications Act may be too outdated to take into consideration how modern society is structured, but the Constitution from hundreds of years ago, that's perfectly relevant. But every T that's crossed and I that's dotted is still perfectly relevant today.
Yeah, I'm just convinced that Louie Gohmert really doesn't understand anything about net neutrality or what we're talking about around net neutrality, and that's why this seems to make sense to him. Letting the free market decide here just doesn't work. We found that out the hard way.
We know what happens when the free market decides. You have a guy who is killed in a mountain of sugar in a factory just after there's deregulation, and the free market all of a sudden decides what that factory should be doing to protect its workers. Just one example. I think what we can all agree on, if we are rational and clear-thinking individuals, is that if Louie Gohmert is against it, it's probably something we should be in favor of. Not every time, it's no guarantee, but it's a really good indicator. We'll take a break. Great interview next with Gretchen Daily.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Gretchen Daily, who's professor of environmental science at Stanford University and also a senior fellow at the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. It's so great to have you on. One of the aspects of your work that I find very, very interesting is the discussion around the economic value of conservation and environmentalism. So take us back to what made you first start to research and work in that area.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, this has kind of become my obsession. And I guess it goes back to my early days as a student when I saw a lot of the people who came along in the conservation movement a generation or so ahead of me really stymied in their efforts that, on the one hand, setting up nature reserves and related conservation investments were paying off a little bit. They've definitely made a difference in the world, but they weren't doing nearly enough. And it was obvious that we had to go way beyond the idea of reserves when it comes to thinking about securing our life support systems and securing human well-being as we enter really this quite unpredictable, challenging phase ahead.
And tell us about some of the specific projects you've been involved in. I mean, really all over the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America, et cetera, that have worked along the lines of let's be very aware of the economic benefits of the conservation work we're doing, just to give our audience a couple of examples.
Yeah, it's incredibly inspiring actually to see how quickly this new approach has come to the fore. So people, for example, in China are zoning the entire country to focus investments in sort of natural capital, these parts of China's landscapes that are most important for securing downstream cities and farmland from flooding, for securing key areas from sand and dust storms and helping with air quality, for just helping to regulate water flow to optimize hydropower production. It's really practical investments, but it's amounting to 45% of the country that's going into this new kind of zoning that will receive kind of special incentives to kind of harmonize people, their livelihoods and industry and urbanization and all that in a really smart way. Harmonize people and all those activities with conservation. Another amazing example comes from Latin America, where, like all over the world, we see more and more cities worrying about water supply, both the quality of the drinking water, just like people worry about that in New York City, a really famous example, but also just the quantity of drinking water and whether there's enough, like in Sao Paulo today. And in about 45 cities across Latin America, the people in the cities are thinking about their connections to people upstream who provide the quality and quantity and kind of timing of flow of the drinking water. And they're starting to make investments upstream in a really credible and replicable way, using new understanding of how improving farming or reforesting upland areas can help make the drinking water supply of the millions of people downstream a lot safer and more secure. So those are two examples, but like you say, across the world, this idea of valuing nature in some way, just shining a light on the connections between people and nature, has really taken off, and it's sparking a lot of innovation that is playing out differently in different countries and contexts, like with governments or with corporations. So I see a lot of promise in it. I feel we're at the beginning of a kind of an awakening of human dependence and connections with nature.
Talk to us a little bit about the sort of economic analysis that is being done here. And this is sort of a crude analogy, but there's been this similar line of research done with regard to when we look at welfare programs, right? And you see people, a movement that comes to the forefront and says, we don't want to be doing this type of government spending. We feel that it's wasteful. And when we actually analyze what happens when you eliminate social welfare programs, you end up spending more money because of the negative social costs that come up, higher crime. You end up having all sorts of community negative externalities, et cetera. And in the long run, it actually ends up being a higher financial cost. So there's this kind of shift that's going on, at least among some. Some are resisting this shift in thinking. Talk to us about that as a sort of analogy to the economic arguments around conservation.
That's a really good analogy. And I'd say going back to the beginning, the arguments, and they're still like this in the pockets of resistance, had to do with, kind of the two extremes. One extreme, people saying nature is absolutely invaluable. We can't possibly put a monetary dollar, value to it. That would be just sacrilege to do something like that. And I understand that perspective. Obviously, there are a lot of dimensions of nature and our connections to nature that are so deep and powerful that it would be ridiculous to sort of slap a price tag on all the beauty and inspiration we get from being in spectacular places. But at the same time, at the other extreme, people were saying, this is just vacant land here. It's not doing anything for us. I'm going to pave it over and turn it into a shopping mall and make a lot of money. And at that end, valuing nature at nothing, at zero, if you didn't see a bunch of elephants and tigers running around on it, that was clearly an extreme as well. So the idea here is to bring some smart thinking to all these conflicts we face today, where basically we're over 7 billion people on the planet, all jostling for space, for water, for other resources. And we've got to figure out a better way of, prioritizing what really is most important here. How do we maintain our basic, life support services of climate stability and health and food security and these other things?
Well, that conversation about how to value is very interesting because it happens a lot just in terms of discussions of the privatization of the commons. And while I sympathize with the view that on the one hand, it seems a little bit crude to just say, this is what this piece of the environment is worth, from a pragmatic standpoint, modern day 2015, whether you value a piece of the environment at infinity or zero, it could end up having the same impact, which is that it's not taken seriously as something that has value.
That's exactly right. You say it really well. And attaching some measures of value doesn't mean, selling something off or just crassly, vastly underestimating the total value of the thing. And I'll give you a specific example. Early on, when I started working in this area, one of the big questions that came up was I was working in rainforests in Central America and on coffee plantations. We all drink coffee, and at the same time, coffee is one of the biggest destroyers of rainforest. Anywhere you see coffee growing today, you used to have a spectacular rainforest. So was there any hope of kind of harmonizing forest protection and coffee production and all those livelihoods of people, including in the U.S., where we are so dependent on coffee? And what we found was that actually there are, millions of little bees, mostly these little social stingless bees that don't do any harm to people, that come buzzing out of forest and pollinating the coffee. We found that the coffee near forest was a lot more productive, about 20% higher yield from the little coffee shrubs situated near rainforest, where the bees could zoom out of their little nests and come pollinate the coffee flowers. And they also had a lot higher quality, about 25% higher quality there near rainforest. So if you take that into account, then the best thing, the smartest thing from an economic point of view for farmers is to keep some rainforest kind of in ribbons and little areas weaving in and around coffee plantations. And that's true for a lot of our crops that depend on bees and other little insects to do the pollination. So that's an example of just one little study showing this surprising and hidden value of nature to people. And what's happened over the past 10 or 15 years is there have been thousands of these studies now, all revealing an economic value of nature. And all these values are little underestimates. We're right now just looking one kind of benefit at a time, like boosting yield of farmers or improving health of kids, drinking local water supply, or helping to secure the climate so we don't face these incredible storms or droughts that are starting to beset us in the US. But all these values add up to a lot and really can change our decision making. And it's inspiring to see how many governments and also corporations are starting to factor these values into their decision making.
No question about it, and it's such a huge paradigm shift in terms of how so many people are thinking about this. Let me mention the book, The New Economy of Nature: The Quest to Make Conservation Profitable, written with journalist Catherine Ellison. We've been speaking with Gretchen Daily, professor of environmental science at Stanford University, senior fellow at the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. Really a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you so much. Great talking with you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Obvious racism can be pretty obvious sometimes. Let me tell you a little story. I think you'll like this one. There's an Iowa newspaper called The Gazette. It's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. They're now accused of pro-white, anti-black bias because of how they handled a group of black and white suspects who were allegedly involved in essentially the same crime in drastically different ways. They reported on it. And it just so happens the variations seem to correlate to race. On March 23rd, the Gazette reported about 3 University of Iowa wrestlers. The wrestlers were arrested because they were caught in possession of stolen items. These 3 suspects were all white. They were pictured in the paper in their yearbook pictures wearing shirts and ties. They're accused of at least 7 burglaries in the area. Exhibit A. Exhibit B. On the same day, the same reporter at the same paper, Lee Hermiston, reported on 4 black suspects who were also charged with burglary. All 4 of these suspects were pictured in their mugshots rather than their yearbook photos. Since the story broke, since the allegations of bias broke, the Gazette changed the pictures of the white suspects to their mugshots. But of course, we still have the original picture that they used and we're showing it to our TV audience. You could say, well, maybe, the black suspects are older, so it would have been more difficult to find their yearbook pictures. Maybe their yearbook pictures were in black and white or something. The reality is that all of the white suspects had mugshots taken, and the process was identical for acquiring the white mugshots as it was for the black mugshots, and ultimately the newspaper did get the white mugshots, but the reporter and paper chose not to take that step. And if you look at the comments on this story online, the racism is just being furthered. People saying, well, of course they didn't show you the yearbook pictures of the black suspects because they didn't have yearbook pictures, because black people don't go to school. And this is not about saying that the reporter hates black people. This is about the subtlety of racism in corporate media, in the justice system, everywhere. Systemic racism is a real thing. Yesterday's voicemail was about systemic racism impacting African Americans. And this is such a good example, Louis.
A fascinating example. And it's great that that this happened and that we stumbled upon it. It makes me think that there should be comprehensive studies that try to tackle this issue. I think it could be done a number of really interesting ways, but I don't think there are many people working on that.
And we have studies that tell us that for similarly aged, older teenagers who are suspects in crimes, those who are not white are more likely to not be referred to as children or teenagers than are white suspects. We have all these studies, we know about it, but this is a really glaring example. Very, very interesting. I talked to you earlier this week about that double standard involving the pilot of the crashed Germanwings Flight 9525, 28-year-old Andreas Lubitz, being a white German rather than a Muslim, and how the terrorism label is thought of very differently. And I even played a clip of Pat Robertson wondering whether the guy was Muslim, because why else would he want to crash a plane? Here's that Pat Robertson clip from earlier this week.
The co-pilot then takes the plane, pushes it into a dive, and crashes it. The passengers are screaming as the plane went down. The pilot is yelling. The voice recorder have got it all on tape. What a terrible tragedy. Was that co-pilot a Muslim? Was he suicidal? What was it about him? He had 630 hours flying experience, which isn't a whole lot.
Now, Bryan Fischer, host of American Family Association Hate Group Radio, Focal Point, I believe is the name of his program, he seized on a news report that reported that the co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, was looking at gay porn websites. He had a girlfriend at the time of his death, but reportedly he was looking at gay porn websites and websites relating to suicide. And now Bryan Fischer says, forget about race, forget about religion. The right lens is sexual orientation, or at least it might be. Here's Bryan.
The 27-year-old was treated by 4 psychiatrists in the months leading up to the fatal plane crash. A small mountain of drugs believed to be antidepressants were found at Lubitz's apartment. Now one of the things, and I'm not saying this is the cause. Please don't misunderstand me, but it's striking that one of the health risks that's associated with homosexual behavior is an increased risk of suicidal ideation. I'm looking at a piece on a pro-gay website just talking about the suicide rate among youth. Studies have found that GLBT youth attempt suicide more than 3 times more frequently than their heterosexual counterparts.
Isn't it fascinating, Louis? Religion goes away all of a sudden as the lens through which to analyze this, because Andreas Lubitz was presumably raised in a Christian household, or maybe non-religious, who knows. Race goes away because we're talking about a white German guy, but now we should explore whether it was sexual orientation that drove him to commit this act.
Yeah, and if you are, it's a strange angle. I mean, I would say it's conspiracy theory stuff. Is he a shape-shifting lizard? Is he, a Muslim convert? Is he gay? I don't really understand it. I know the guy had demons, but I think it's just simple mental illness here.
And we can't ignore that when Bryan Fischer talks about how gay people have higher rates of suicidal ideation, it's not because they're gay. It's because of the shame and the bigotry that is brought on to those who are part of the LGBT community by people like Bryan Fischer. So he has the information in front of him. It is true that there's a higher rate of suicide attempts and suicidal ideation amongst LGBT individuals, but it's not inherently because they are LGBT. It's because of the repression and the shame and the bigotry that is associated with that. I don't think we're going to get Bryan Fischer to really come to terms with that reality.
No, and you know what? Maybe that did have something to do with this, but we can also say with certitude that he wanted to kill other people, and I don't think that was because he is gay or not gay.
At least he was indifferent to other people dying. We can say that in whatever state he was in, no question about it. Our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen to this voicemail.
Hey, David, man, I want to compliment you on your show. You do a fine job, especially for such a young man. I feel like the world's in good hands with the millennials and stuff, and I'm just taking it for granted that you're one of them. I'm an older guy. I live in Indiana. I personally have experienced the rule of Mike Pence, and he certainly is no Mitch Daniels. Mitch Daniels was a snake in the grass. He was smart. He built us a road to nowhere through the only blue liberal county in the state, went right through one of the most liberal areas where there was a commune, destroyed people's property values, and it goes nowhere through wetlands and stuff. But this Mike Pence, what he is, he's Dan Quayle light, man. This guy probably doesn't have 3/4 of a brain in his head.
You like that, Louis? Mike Pence, a sort of Dan Quayle light? It's a pretty good analogy.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Maybe not as charming.
Yes, I certainly would agree with that. On today's bonus show, Louis will tell us about stolen Uber accounts, the White House taking on superbugs, and IKEA refugee shelters. Refugee shelters. That and much more on today's bonus show. Sign up for the bonus show by going to davidpakman.com/membership. Louis is back from a busy trip pleading the blood of Jesus. He will tell us all about it on today's bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.